It's no secret that white's considered one of the weaker colors in Commander. I mean, who am I kidding? It's the weakest, right? Well, white does struggle to compete with multicolor decks, green-based decks in particular. It's still got a number of strengths that warrant a second look. If you're struggling to keep up with the table with your mono-white deck, then maybe it's worth re-examining your deck list. Today I want to take a look at 5 ways you can increase the consistency of your white decks by capitalizing on white's strengths. Yes, white has strengths. It's all too easy to get caught up in white's shortcomings and focus only on the bad cards, and the things it doesn't get. There have been a number of boons over the past couple of years, though. Heliod's Intervention, Dismantling Wave, Verge Rangers, and Luminous Broodmoth have definitely been moving in the right direction. The biggest upgrade has no doubt been Smothering Tithe. I don't need to tell you how good this card is. It goes in way more than mono-white decks. What can white do with these treasures, though? Well, one option that works for more casual decks is to play Mind's Eye. It's a build-your-own Rhystic Study. Sure, it's not quite Rhystic Study, but it's something. Now, what I actually want to point out here in regards to treasure is the very underrated treasure map. The front side of treasure map allows us to scry by paying 1 and tapping it. Doing so puts a counter on the map, and once it is 3, it will flip. At any point in the game, being able to scry away what you don't need in a color without access to much draw power is great. Where this shines, though, is early game. One of the most common ways white decks fall behind in the early game is hitting cards in the wrong order, either hitting all lands and no spells, or all spells and missing land drops. To make matters worse, many white decks tend to favor either big, splashy spells like Elesh Norn, or smaller, less impactful cards that only really work in synergy with other game pieces. Treasure Map allows you to filter past these unwanted cards, making sure we hit land drops, and helping us dig for answers if we really need them. Being able to take a scry in our opponent's end step, and then another if we need to in our upkeep, can sometimes make the difference. Once Treasure Map flips, we're granted 3 treasure tokens and a land that can tap and sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. Well, hey, that's some card draw in white, isn't it? One of the better aspects of Treasure Cove at this stage in the game is that we have options. If we played Treasure Map turn 2, then on average, we can be going into turn 5 with 8 mana. If we've played any other rocks as well, we can have a deluge of mana here. Dropping the aforementioned Elesh Norn early can be devastating, as can dropping a board wipe and playing another spell. We could also use the mana to play and equip an equipment, and even play a creature to put it on. We don't need to spend all of the mana though, we can just bank the treasures for later, or use them to draw cards. If you're playing Smothering Tithe in white, chances are you should be playing Treasure Map too. It's a great source to draw as the game progresses. If you don't draw into the Smothering Tithe, and you're playing more than one color in your deck, you can always drop a bounce land like Boros Garrison to reset the Treasure Cove and replay it as a treasure map. It's not the biggest play, but keep it in mind. It's no secret that white's the best color when it comes to equipment, and you'd be mad to not include what you can reasonably budget for. Stoneforge Mystic has just been reprinted, and it's a fantastic way to grab your equipment out of your deck. What's more, using Stoneforge Mystic's ability to put an equipment into play gets around those confounded counterspells, which is super useful. Even if you can't stretch to one of those, there are myriad options, from the ultra-budget Relic Seeker to the more powerful Stonehewer Giant. If you're going wide, Quest for the Holy Relic is not as bad as it looks. And at sorcery, you also have Steel Shaper's Gift and Open the Armory, the latter of which unlocks many great aura options like Darksteel Mutation, Gift of Immortality, and Prison Term. But what are we getting? A lot of the best pieces of equipment are also pretty expensive, it's true. And while cards like Sword of Fire and Ice and Sword of Feast and Famine are great ways to draw cards and ramp by untapping lands, there are better options in the early game that should draw less ire from your opponents. Sword of the Animist and Mask of Memory are arguably the best sources of ramp to draw to mono white and maybe Boros too. Forget your Cartographer's Hawks, these two equipments are where it's at. Sword of the Animist is a rampant growth every turn, and Mask of Memory can let you dig 2 cards deep while also setting up your graveyard for any reanimation like Elspeth Conquers Death or Karmic Guide. Other worthwhile options in this utility end of equipment are Skull Clamp, Rogue's Gloves, and Infiltration Lens for drawing cards, and Dousing Dagger and Prying Blade for mana generation. Another great one for Treasure Cove, by the way. I could sit and pick out equipment all day, but what's more relevant to this side of deck building for white decks is having cheap, evasive creatures to connect with in order to gain those bonuses. Think Selfless Spirit and Remorseful Cleric, effects you want anyway. We just touched on the idea of setting up our graveyard with Mask of Memory, and ramping basic lands into play with Sword of the Animist. The game plan of both of these cards meets in the middle beautifully with Emeria the Sky Ruin. Emeria is probably one of the better payoffs in Commander for being in mono white, and not being legendary, which is weird if you think about it. You can get more than one copy into play by playing Vesuva or Thespian's Stage. Ideal if you're expecting it to be destroyed or if you're just greedy for effects. On our upkeep, if we have 7 planes in play, then Emeria triggers and we can return a creature to the battlefield. This is insanely good and can really help set us up to win the end game by way of attrition. Bringing back a Palace Jailer every upkeep by making sure to send it to Elysium every turn through a sacrifice outlet like High Market ensures we get to exile something every turn, provided we keep the monarchy. Alternatively, using Karmic Guide, we can keep on bringing back our creatures that die. Remember, Emeria triggers when we hit 7 planes, not 7 basic planes. This means cards like Mistveil planes will count, as will any dual or shock lands. So what's the best way to get these planes into play? Well, beyond Sword of the Animist, we can get planes out of our deck with Knight of the White Orchid and Core Cartographer. Provided opponents have more lands than us, cards like Tithe and Land Tax can also help. Classic ramp creatures like Burnished Heart and of course Sad Robot can also help. I'm not so keen on Endless Horizons anymore, given how much removal tends to go flying around, but Gift of Estates, now that's reasonable in even the most budget of budget builds. White ramp exists in a weird place. The better effects seek to break parity, while many of the more efficient effects seek to take advantage of you being behind in land drops. You'll have to sequence your plays in order to make sure these different cards work correctly. It's also why Cartographer Hawk sucks. You put all those riders on there and expect me to not want to slap Sword of the Animist on it? No, thank you. There are 2 more main effects we can enjoy by playing planes. The first is we can play Snow-Covered Plains and Extraplanar Lens in an effort to double our mana and not an opponent's. If we do choose to go this route, they will still count toward Emeria, and they give us access to On Thin Ice, a nice efficient removal aura if that's our jam. The best payoff for playing planes has to be Emeria Shepherd. Emeria Shepherd has landfall, and when it triggers, we can return a non-land permanent from our graveyard to our hand. If the land we played was a plains, though, Emeria Shepherd returns that non-land permanent to the battlefield. Oh! This is a supremely powerful effect, and if we can trigger it multiple times a turn, we can quickly rescue every last friend and ally from the underworld. We're already running ways to bring lands out like Burnished Heart, Sad Robot, and Sword of the Animist, and with those we can often have blistering turns rebuilding after a wrath. If you want to replicate this effect without Emeria Shepherd in hand, then another payoff for running a lot of white mana sources is Marshall's Anthem. Not to be confused with Marshall Sutcliffe's Anthem, which has something to do with quadrant theory and cracking packs only to draft. The multi-kicker ensures that the more you pay into it, the better value it'll feel. Sure, it's ripe for a counterspell, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Just imagine paying 10 mana for this board. We start out by bringing back Emeria Shepherd, Karmic Guide, Sun Titan. Karmic Guide gets the Sad Robot, which gets a plains. Sun Titan gets a plains. These 2 plains trigger, allowing us to bring back Avacyn, Angel of Hope, and Palace Jailer. That's really not bad, and if we have the window to do this, we should certainly take the chance. Oh, and by the way, pack an expedition map and an endless atlas for your trip. Finding a Maria and drawing an extra card a turn for playing multiple planes is a no-brainer here. By this point, I'm hoping you're on board. White can do some cool stuff. Let's look next at tokens and my main pick for this category, Oketra's Monument. This artifact does two things for us. It reduces the cost of our creature spells, and it gives us 1/1 warrior tokens whenever we cast these spells. It's a solid card, and even without anything else to push its strengths, we're getting a good rate. It's also tutorable with Thalia's Lancers for what it's worth. Skull Clamp, which we already looked at, is the chocolate to go with this card's peanut butter. It'll turn the extra tokens into valuable card draw and is one of the better combos with this card. We can also get some card draw going with Mentor of the Meek, seeing as the tokens produced are 1/1s. And we can use Idol of Oblivion to draw from these tokens too. Tokens are always better in multiples, and Anointed Procession can really crank the token production up. This is a great include if you're already running Smothering Tithe, as it'll double up these tokens too. That's pretty hot. The new mass token production spell called the Coppercoats is another consideration if you're really going down the token route. Finally, a favorite, Divine Visitation, can turn those 1/1 warriors into 4/4 flying vigilant angels. Wow, that's a pretty good deal for casting creature spells. Historically, payoffs for life gain haven't really been worth shouting about, but just lately we've had some really great ones. First up, Heliod's Suncrowned is a great way to convert life gain into damage on board. Beyond the obvious combo with blocking Ballista, giving it lifelink, and sitting back to spray and pray, there are some other interesting cards to try, like the somewhat niche Mindless Automaton. If you're deep in 1/1 counters, give this robot a go for some more white card draw. And adding in Basri's Lieutenant and Together Forever can give you a really resilient board presence. If we're wanting to draw cards, then look no further than Dawn of Hope and Well of Lost Dreams. Both of these will trigger when we gain life, and Well of Lost Dreams usually gets a lot of dirty looks. What's this? White drawing multiple cards? We can't have that. Triggering these is easier than you'd think, and you don't have to jam your deck with all of the Soul Sisters and Authority of the Consuls you can get your hands on in order to do it. Pristine Talisman and Inventor's Fair can both give incidental life gain without asking much. And if you're playing an angel theme, Seraph's Sanctuary and Bishop of Wings can contribute too. Hell, even using High Market to sacrifice one of the tokens we get from Oketra's Monument to trigger Dawn of Hope isn't the worst. Speaking of tokens, we can use this life gain to make tokens too. Between Resplendent Angel and Angelic Accord, we can make angels every turn, including opponents' turns if we gain enough life. And amassing a board of flyers can present lethal pretty quickly. Crested Sun Mare is even more efficient, asking only that we gain 1 life as opposed to 4 or 5. The other main payoff for life gain is of course Aetherflux Reservoir. Though a more common sight in combo decks, it still serves a role here, allowing us to swing out with combat damage against one player and then finish the other one with the good old Super Laser. There's one card everyone is sleeping on when it comes to white life gain though, Ajani Strength of the Pride. One-sided wraths are amazing, and Ajani asks very little of you to get there, just being on 55 life. This isn't very difficult if you put enough life gain into your deck, so what are you waiting for? Too often people see white decks struggling in Commander and conclude that the only option is to shore up white's weaknesses. While that's a good approach, it's actually useful to also consider how playing to our strengths might lend even more power to our decks. The cards I've named today are all great includes in any white deck, and the interweaving synergies I've listed that can evolve from these initial picks can really help to sow some interplay between the cards we're playing. Seriously though, only around 1/3 of the Heliod Suncrown decks were running Ajani, Strength of the Pride. And according to EDH Rec, only 4 of the 300 or so Lyra Dawnbringer decks are. One-sided wraths are good, friends. If you'd like to see a deck that puts this into practice, then consider this Lyra the Dawnbringer deck that our very own script supervisor Kristen Gregory pilots regularly at more casual tables. I'll drop the link in the description. What are your favorite underappreciated synergies in mono white? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, wizards are aware and making moves to rebalance white in EDH. It just takes a little time. let's talk about the real villains of Deep Space Nine. The two biggies, we've got Kai Wynn, right? And we've got Gul Dukat. Why don't you start with Kai Wynn?
Kai Wynn, Nurse Ratched herself.
If Mr. McMurphy doesn't want to take his medication orally, I'm sure we can arrange that he can have it some other way. Walk with the prophets.
Nurse Ratched!
Nurse Ratched herself. So I picked black, and I think you could also make an argument that she is kind of a black-white because she believes like fanatically what she believes, but I still made her black anyway. And the character that I picked for her was Arya, first of Loxswain.